I think it's safe to say that we're in a weird place with sports shows. With the rise of the internet and social media, everyone kind of has a platform to give their opinions on what's happening in the sports world. Like, bro, everyone has a fucking podcast now. Everyone's got a hot take, everyone has narratives, which is what sports has basically become at this point. Shows on national television are more concerned with what will give them ratings, and it's gotten to a point where the objective is to just make noise instead of attempting to give somewhat decent analysis. As social media has grown and analytics have become more prevalent today, it's easy to disprove or counter the takes of sports media figures, which has led to a majority of people souring on some of these shows. Now, a lot of people will tune in just for some entertainment or to pass the time without really caring, and that's fine. You're probably at a better place in life than most sports fanatics like myself. And to be honest, entertainment is an important aspect of sports shows. I think today though, most shows will lean on that factor as opposed to actual analysis, which is understandable. It's what will draw an audience. It's why Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee are at the forefront of this shit. But what defines entertainment in a sports show? Nowadays, it's considered getting heated or speaking loud to get your point across. It's saying something outlandish to entice a reaction out of the person you're sitting across from. There's not really much thought and effort put into sports shows these days. For someone who loves sports and dedicates a decent portion of their lives to watching them, Stephen A. Smith yelling and speaking nonsense doesn't cut it. At all. But that's what these shows are now. Yelling, hot takes, revisionist history, legends of sports getting salty sometimes and clowning some of the younger generation of athletes or being defensive about their place in history. And I think it's pretty normal for people to kind of change their opinions on sports shows. First Take was enjoyable during high school and my early years of college. Undisputed had a nice run until Skip fucked everything up with Shannon. The Pat McAfee show is fun and all and has a lot of great guests, but it's not necessarily my first round pick for sports takes. Inside the NBA is officially over after next season, and that to me, along with most people I assume, is the gold standard even though it's mainly basketball. Am I going to miss it? For sure.
For sure.
But seeing Shaq get overly sensitive about shit and just hearing some of their bad takes that we kind of just let slide because they as a group are hilarious, a part of me isn't insanely sad about it ending. Yeah, I get it. Fuck me, I'm an idiot, yeah, for sure. Shit on me. I understand. Great show though, great show. I'd say the difficulty is finding the perfect balance between entertainment and quality sports examination. And look, not all the opinions of these sports media figures are gospel. You'll find yourself disagreeing with them most of the time. The field of sports talk is just too oversaturated and it's tough to find a show to latch onto. But fortunately, I did. I believe it was around 2016 when I started to really get into sports analysis. And it was the Golden State Warriors 73-9 season that really drew me in. The media was sucking them off and the constant repetitive analysis kind of made me grow tired of them real quick. Then a clip of Colin Cowherd appeared on my Twitter feed at the time and it was my first instance of listening to him. He wasn't really going overboard with the Warriors praise while also not discrediting them, and I thought, okay.
I'm interested.
The guy seems like he knows what he's talking about, level-headed, down the middle, so I'd watch more clips of him. And over time, he'd have a certain guest on, Nick Wright, and as I'd watch more of him on Colin's show, I immediately had disdain for him. Some obnoxious guy with a buzz cut who was annoyingly pretentious, has awful facial hair, and loves LeBron James way too much. But he was able to get his own show on FS1 along with Chris Carter, a former football player, and Jenna Wolfe, a former news anchor, called First Things First. And while I wasn't fond of Nick Wright, I was willing to give the show a try because I was enamored with sports talk shows around then and I wanted to watch everything. And by giving the show a try, I mean just watching clips on YouTube because the show would be on at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and I wasn't getting up for that respectfully. Unfortunately, the show didn't stand out or anything like that. FS1 had a 2-show juggernaut in The Herd with Colin Cowherd and Undisputed with Skip and Shannon. And both those shows were great to watch. Colin had a magnificent storytelling quality about him with a solid voice that just drew you in. And Skip and Shannon had great synergy between them that made their show extremely enjoyable. First Things First just didn't have anything that stuck out. The chemistry between Nick, Chris, and Jenna felt a bit off and it just wasn't clicking. Nick Wright's I'm smarter than you personality wasn't something to gravitate towards, and it felt like there was an odd imbalanced power dynamic where Chris would sometimes belittle and kind of look down upon Nick, in a way. All this on top of a 6:30 a.m. time slot just made First Things First seem forgettable. Around 2019, Chris Carter left the show, but Nick Wright and Jenna Wolfe remained. They would rotate guests here and there, but nothing really sustainable, and it just felt like First Things First was in purgatory. Fast forward to early 2020, and a new member joins the show, sports television producer Kevin Wildes. And the first few episodes with him were okay. Not the most entertaining guy, a bit awkward, but chemistry does take time, so First Things First kind of had to rebuild and start from the ground up. And then, yeah, shit happened in 2020. We're in the thick of a pandemic, there's no sports going on, my circadian rhythm is cooked, and my sleeping schedule is beyond fucked. Fast forward a bit and sports start to slowly return, and so do sports shows. The lineup to FS1 is still the same, First Things First early in the morning, but this time around 7 to 7:30 a.m.-ish, followed by Undisputed and then The Herd. So because my life is out of sorts and I'm awake early in the morning at this time, I decided to watch First Things First. And weirdly enough, it was around the thick of the pandemic where the show started to find itself. Nick Wright, Kevin Wildes, and Jenna Wolfe all returned, but everything was remote. The fourth member of the show would still rotate until they landed on Brandon Marshall, a former football player turned analyst. Nick started to loosen up a bit and wasn't as serious and stuck up like he was in the initial run. Plus, he was growing his hair out too. Kevin Wildes looked a lot more comfortable, and the vibes between him and Nick in particular began to pick up. There seemed to be a comfort between the two, and they rebounded off each other really well. Brandon Marshall left the show after a year, which was fine because Brandon Marshall was kind of annoying and the fit between him and everyone else wasn't the best. But it wasn't until August 2021 where the show started to really hit its stride. First Things First then replaced Brandon Marshall with Chris Broussard, an analyst for FS1, even though some of you may remember him as a former reporter for ESPN. He would constantly appear as a guest on the show and fit in seamlessly with the rest of the crew, so this addition made a lot of sense. But First Things First felt a bit under the radar though. It was still on extremely early in the morning during a pandemic, and to be honest, it was probably at the bottom of the pecking order for most people in terms of sports shows. Undisputed, The Herd, First Take, Get Up, those are usually the go-to shows for people. But First Things First was still doing its thing. The chemistry between everyone was rapidly improving, the vibes were great, everyone seemed to get along with one another, and they offered strong analysis while being creative with some of their segments. A friendly dynamic was established within the debates they had, something that wasn't apparent when Chris Carter or Brandon Marshall was there, who both seemed to have a superiority complex when it came to discussions and analysis. But this time, there was a perfect blend of unique personalities, and it looked like there was joy amongst all of them working together. Jenna Wolfe, the host, Nick Wright, the intellectual one, Chris Broussard, the neutral party who viewed all perspectives, and Kevin Wildes, the comedic relief of the show who also offered quality takes of his own. But to be honest, all of them are jokes and all of them brought out the best of one another. So yeah, the pandemic sucked, but a sports show that seemed to be in purgatory when it first aired started to develop and become a staple of sports media that people could turn to during a tough time. The pandemic eases up, Jenna Wolfe steps away, but the trio of Nick, Wildes, and Broussard, also known as Brew, remain, and this time the boys are finally in studio. The show gets the 3 p.m. time slot, Wildes takes over as host but still gives his takes, and it's just the three of them going forward. Ever since the move to the studio in 2022 with these guys being at the forefront, I can confidently say that First Things First is the best sports show in the world right now. Like, I'm not even trying to gas it up, I'm being so serious. We're given extremely strong analysis, or cogent analysis as they like to say, from each of them that's backed up by statistics and data, which are presented through creative graphics, and most of the time, they'll bring up facts that you've never even heard of, but it creates proper context for the argument or debate at hand. It's a show that strives to be statistically accurate while making the content enjoyable for the viewers, and that enjoyment is because of the phenomenal chemistry between Nick, Wildes, and Brew. It's the type of chemistry and rapport that you have with your own best friends. To anyone out there that yaps about sports most of the time, especially with your boys, you're basically seeing a representation of that on TV through First Things First. The three of them talk to one another as if they're hanging out at the crib, a bar, or wherever you talk about sports. It's a natural energy that's infectious. Like, they're not afraid to cut ass on each other, and that's how you know you have an actual friendship, when you can do that and laugh about it afterwards. The show is informative, it's hilarious, and you basically feel the need to tune in every day. It's a show that has inadvertently created its own lore and lexicon, where phrases like never a doubt, cogent analysis, must win, supernatural funk, dripping in objectivity, and rich tapestry are constantly said. It's a show that hangs banners and creates its own bylaws. It's a show with fun and creative segments like Nick's Tiers, where he and a committee rank NFL teams and put them in certain categories. And all the categories have like unique names that Nick comes up with every week. It's a tier list, by the way, not the standings. There's Chris Broussard's Bud List, where he lists athletes, teams, and coaches across all sports who are under duress based on performances, expectations, and all that stuff. But of course, it's a motivational segment that's considered an inspiration and not an indictment. Not to mention, it starts off with a great intro from Wilds where he reads physical mail from non-existent fictional people he created, like Ryan, Brian, Don, and Don Sr., which leads to the crew creating fake products just for the fun of it, and also to make fun of Brew. It's so outlandish and dank, but it's fucking hilarious. Wilds is Weird and Wonderful is a brief segment that shows the most exciting and strange plays throughout the entire sports world. Mahomes Mountain is where they rank the best NFL quarterbacks on a weekly basis. The desk is filled with fake snow and Wilds pretends he's on an actual mountain during the start of the segment too. King of the Hill is when they rank the best basketball players. They add butterflies, effects of course, on TV and put fake grass on the table with a crown in the middle. Upset Alert is when the boys will pick an underdog football team who isn't favored to win the game they're in that week. Wilds was on a crazy hot streak for like 10 straight weeks until Broussard just took over. Club Superstar is a list of NBA players who Nick considers a superstar and explains why he thinks so. Security guards are also behind Nick the entire time as well. Just a plethora of interesting and hysterical segments while also providing stats to back up their takes. There's also different music made for each segment and they all kind of fit the theme for each one. In addition to all that, Broussard will call a team like the Miami Dolphins breakdancers, or frontrunners if you want to be more specific, based on their style of play, and they will legitimately bring in breakdancers on the show when the Dolphins lose. Nick will support Trevor Lawrence more than anyone else on the planet and call him the Prince. After a W or a really good performance, he will bring in actual trumpeteers dressed in medieval clothing to further the Prince moniker that he created for Trevor. Wilds will stand Mac Jones forever and call him Baby Goat. The Cowboys will defeat mediocre teams and Brew will bring in tomato cans as a metaphor for who the Cowboys are actually beating. Tomato cans means trash teams. A team will defeat another one by a large amount and Brew will joke around and say that that team went into the house of the opposing one, sat on the couch, put their feet up, and demanded a sandwich. The best part? Broussard will wear an actual robe during the segment and put his feet up while being handed a legitimate sandwich by someone behind the scenes. There's inside jokes that they bring up like Nick's vape pen and Brew being from 100 different places. Wilds also has phenomenal one-liners and enhances the comedic flair of the show by busting Nick's balls from time to time. Sunglasses are worn every time a prediction is accurately made by one of them. Brew loves crumble cookies. Wilds embraces a gentleman-like character and quote-unquote plays jazz music anytime there's a gentleman sweep in basketball. But he's not playing that music for real. It's all good though. Like, you hear all of this and think, what kind of sports show is this? Seems unserious as fuck. Yeah, it is, and that's why it's awesome. These guys don't take themselves too seriously and that's why the show works so well. Two reoccurring guests that appear often, especially during football season, are Eric Mangini, a former coach, and Greg Jennings, a former player. Both of them offer great insight because of their experience in the NFL, but they also just vibe really well with the trio. Greg is basically one of the boys, and Eric Mangini is kind of the old head who adapted to the youthful and chaotic energy that Nick, Wilds, and Brew bring. And he also joins in on the fun of picking on Nick. The show is also expanded with additional content on their YouTube channel. They do a mock post-game press conference where each of them talk about how they individually did on the show. They tally up their jokes and address things such as Wilds getting angry once in a while. Recently, they started doing a kind of faux office series about stuff behind the scenes, and you can tell that everyone is still themselves and it's awesome to watch. You also get a glimpse of everyone behind the camera who helps create the magic, from producers to the graphics department. That's another thing with First Things First. While Nick, Wilds, and Brew are great, they make sure those behind the scenes also get their flowers by giving them credit during their takes. Most people only know the stars on camera when it comes to sports shows, But First Things First is the first show I've seen to make it known that the crew not on camera is just as important and involved. I've been watching sports shows for most of my life, and I can't seem to pinpoint one that's better than First Things First. And I'm being dead honest. I've never seen segments conceptualized so quickly based on something one of the three would randomly say. It balances humor and analysis perfectly, and the chemistry between all parties has created something special for those who watch sports frequently. The atmosphere is so carefree that you feel like you're boys with all of them. So much so that the show can be considered an escape from your stressful day, even if it's just for an hour and a half. Which is crazy to think about considering it's just a sports show. Quick update, the show has expanded to 2 hours now, so shout out to them because they deserve it. Nick Wright went from obnoxious and serious heavy analytics TV heel to a much more laid back and likable guy who still embodies the same characteristics he did when he first started, but not as annoying. And shout out to him for sticking through the bumps the show had to go through in order to get to its current version. Kevin Wildes went from television producer who looked like he was there to fill in, to internet darling and the heart of the show. Shout out to Wildes, man, he's the GOAT. Chris Broussard went from the guy at ESPN who was only there to break news, to being the most neutral, unbiased, and down the middle analyst in sports. No pom-poms for anyone.
I gotta be who I am.
Those three are kind of the embodiment of the journey First Things First has been on since it started. Some of the greatest television shows we've seen have had an organic growth and got better as each season progressed. And it happened here with a sports show. It had a rocky start, but it stuck the course and continuously got better and is now elite television. And I'm glad I stuck around because the show has honestly become a staple of my life. So Nick Wright, Kevin Wildes, Chris Broussard, and everyone involved in First Things First, thanks for making sports analysis meaningful.